Hello, my incredible storytellers and seekers of truth. Today, we're diving headfirst into a saga so drenched in opulence, betrayal, and heartbreaking secrets, it feels less like a story and more like a carefully constructed lie waiting to unravel. It's a tale that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, fortune, and the very foundations upon which powerful legacies are built. The lights, grab your favorite comfort drink, because once we step into the shadow of Blackwood Manor, there's no turning back. Our story begins, not in the gilded halls of unimaginable wealth, but in the quiet, unassuming life of a young woman named Elara Vance. Picture her, 28 years old, with eyes that held a gentle curiosity for the world, hair the color of warm chestnut often tied back in a practical ponytail, and a smile that, though infrequent, could genuinely light up a room. Elara wasn't looking for excitement. She was content with her routine. Her days were spent meticulously arranging antique books in a charming, dusty bookstore nestled on a cobbled street, the kind of place where the scent of aged paper and brewing tea hung perpetually in the air. Her evenings were a simple ballet of cooking modest meals in her cozy, slightly cluttered apartment, reading by the glow of a bedside lamp, or sometimes sharing a quiet laugh with her best friend, Maya. Elara's life was, by all accounts, utterly ordinary. She harbored no grand illusions of wealth or status. Her parents, gone too soon, had left her with little more than a box of cherished memories, a scattering of faded photographs, and the deep-seated belief that honesty and hard work were the truest forms of currency. She cherished her independence, her quiet dignity, and the genuine connections she had forged in her small, predictable world. She had, in fact, built a life that she loved, brick by unassuming brick. She found beauty in the mundane, joy in the simple, and peace in the absence of drama. Ah, drama. That elusive beast she had, until this point, so skillfully avoided. But destiny, my friends, has a rather cruel sense of humor, particularly when it involves ancient fortunes and buried truths. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a particularly dreary one, when the first crack appeared in the carefully constructed facade of Elara's ordinary existence. The bookstore was quiet. The rhythmic ticking of an antique grandfather clock the only sound accompanying Elara as she reshelved a first edition of Wuthering Heights. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a visitor. Standing there, framed against the gray light of the street, was a man who seemed entirely out of place in their quaint little haven. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, every line sharp, every crease perfect. His silver hair was neatly combed, his spectacles perched precisely on his aquiline nose, and his expression was one of polite, yet unyielding, formality. He looked less like a casual browser and more like a decree, a legal document made flesh. "Miss Elara Vance?" His voice was smooth, resonant, carrying an air of quiet authority. Elara, momentarily flustered, dusted off her hands on her apron. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" The man offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am a solicitor with the firm of Pendleton, Finch and Thorne. I represent the estate of the late Alistair Blackwood." Alistair Blackwood. The name meant absolutely nothing to Elara. She racked her brain, sifting through distant relatives, long-lost family friends, but came up empty. "I'm sorry, Mr. Pendleton. I don't believe I know anyone by that name." Mr. Pendleton's lips curved into a faint, almost pitying smile. "Indeed, that is precisely why I am here. It appears, Vance, that you are a beneficiary in Mr. Blackwood's last will and testament." Elara felt a strange lurch in her stomach, a sensation akin to stepping off a curb you didn't realize was there. A beneficiary? Her? From someone she didn't know? This had to be a mistake. A scam. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she began, her voice tinged with skepticism. Are you sure you have the right Elara Vance? Quite sure, he replied, reaching into his briefcase. He produced a crisp sealed envelope. This is an official summons, Miss Vance. Mr. Blackwood's will is to be read in 3 days' time at Blackwood Manor. Your presence is highly requested. He paused, his gaze merrily flicking over the modest surroundings of the bookstore, then back to Elara's face, as if weighing her against an unknown scale. I assure you, this is no misunderstanding. The Blackwood family is extensive, and Mr. Blackwood was a man of considerable influence and, shall we say, eccentricities. He handed her the envelope. The paper was thick cream-colored, with a formidable wax seal emblazoned with a coat of arms she'd never seen before, a rearing black stallion against a silver shield. It felt heavy, pregnant with implications she couldn't even begin to comprehend. Elara took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. Her mind raced. What could this possibly mean? A trick? A joke? But Mr. Pendleton's gravitas, his impeccable demeanor, spoke of anything but frivolity. There was a seriousness to him, an undeniable air of importance that permeated the quiet bookstore, making the shelves of beloved stories suddenly feel small and insignificant. After exchanging a few more formal pleasantries, Mr. Pendleton departed as abruptly as he arrived, leaving behind a faint scent of expensive cologne and an even fainter tremor in Elara's carefully constructed world. Elara stared at the envelope in her hand, the Blackwood crest seeming to pulse with a silent challenge. Blackwood Manor. The name itself conjured images of sprawling estates, secret gardens, and perhaps shadows lurking in forgotten corners. It was a world entirely antithetical to her own. Later that evening, in the comforting chaos of her apartment, Elara shared the bizarre encounter with Maya. Maya, with her vibrant red hair and a spirit as fiery as her curls, was Elara's rock, her sounding board, and her occasional voice of reason. Alistair Blackwood? Maya exclaimed, her eyes wide as Elara recounted the tale over a hastily prepared dinner. Elara, are you serious? The Blackwoods? As in the Blackwood Textile Empire? The Blackwood Philanthropic Foundation? The Blackwoods, who practically own half the city and have a personal art collection that rivals national museums? Elara blinked, a piece of pasta halfway to her mouth. I don't know. I told you, I've never heard of him. Or them. Maya practically vibrated with excitement. Oh, Elara, to go! This isn't just some random old man. The Blackwoods are practically royalty. Who knows what kind of distant cousin or long-lost relative you could be? She grabbed Elara's hands, her enthusiasm infectious. Imagine, you could be connected to one of the most powerful families in the country. This could be your fairy tale, girl. Elara, however, felt a chill rather than a thrill. Fairy tales, she knew, often came with wicked stepmothers and poisoned apples. The idea of being thrust into such a world, one so far removed from her own, was daunting. It wasn't the promise of wealth that intrigued her, but the sheer, baffling mystery. Why her? What connection could she possibly have to such an illustrious and clearly intimidating dynasty? Over the next 2 days, the summons weighed heavily on Elara. She researched the Blackwoods online, and the rabbit hole she tumbled down was dizzying. Their history was vast, their influence undeniable. There were mentions of scandals, hushed-up tragedies, and rivalries that stretched back generations. The family tree was intricate, branching out into a dense forest of names and titles. She searched for her own name, for her parents' names, but found no discernible link. It was as if she were a ghost in their history. Doubt gnawed at her. Could this truly be for her? Was it a mistake? A cruel prank? Yet the stern, professional demeanor of Mr. Pendleton lingered in her mind. And the will. Alistair Blackwood had specifically named her. On the morning of the will reading, Elara stood before her meager wardrobe, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Maya had insisted on helping her choose an outfit, something respectable but not ostentatious. Elara settled on a simple, dark gray dress, practical and unassuming. It felt like armor, a shield against a world she was about to enter. A world she intuitively knew was far more complex, and perhaps far more dangerous, than anything she had ever encountered. She took a deep breath, the scent of her own familiar, comforting apartment filling her lungs one last time. She clutched the heavy envelope in her hand, the wax seal pressing into her palm. This wasn't just an invitation. It felt like a summons to an entirely new existence, a challenge to the very fabric of her identity. Little did she know, this journey wasn't just about inheriting a fortune. It was about uncovering a decades-old deception, a family secret so profound it had been meticulously buried, waiting for the right moment and the right person to bring it to light. And that, my friends, is where our true drama begins. The drive to Blackwood Manor felt like a journey not just across town, but across centuries. Elara had opted for a taxi, feeling that her own modest car would be an insult to the grandeur she knew awaited her. As they left the familiar cityscapes behind, the urban sprawl slowly gave way to rolling hills, manicured landscapes, and eventually a long private road framed by ancient, towering oaks whose branches formed a shadowy canopy overhead. The air grew colder, crisper, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. And then it appeared, Blackwood Manor. No photograph, no news article, no amount of online research could have prepared Elara for the sheer, imposing majesty of it. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress, a monument to a dynasty. Built of dark, imposing stone, it sprawled across a vast estate, its Gothic spires reaching towards a perpetually bruised sky. Turrets and battlements punctuated its silhouette, and ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked its way up the ancient walls, giving the impression that the manor was slowly being reclaimed by nature, yet stubbornly resisting. The gates, wrought iron masterpieces adorned with the familiar Blackwood crest, swung open silently as their taxi approached, as if operated by an unseen hand. The long driveway, paved with meticulously placed cobblestones, curved past manicured gardens that, even in late autumn, still hinted at breathtaking beauty. Statues of stern-faced figures stood sentinel amongst artfully arranged shrubbery, their gazes seeming to follow Elara as she passed. Elara felt a prickle of unease. This place didn't just exude wealth. It radiated history, secrets, and an undeniable sense of being watched. It felt less like a home and more like a carefully guarded tomb. The taxi pulled up to the grand entrance, where heavy oak doors, studded with iron, seemed to dwarf the mere mortal standing before them. A liveried doorman, his face impassive, greeted her. "Miss Vance, Mr. Pendleton is expecting you in the grand drawing room." Inside, the manor was a symphony of dark wood, rich tapestries, and hushed silence. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax polish and something else. Something faintly metallic, like old coins and forgotten memories. Elara's sensible heels echoed faintly on the polished marble floor as she was led down a wide corridor, adorned with ancestral portraits. Each pair of eyes in the paintings seemed to pierce through her, judging her, questioning her presence. The grand drawing room was exactly that. Grand. It was an enormous space, bathed in the muted light filtering through tall, arched windows draped in heavy velvet. A roaring fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace, casting flickering shadows across the room. Expensive antique furniture was arranged with an almost ceremonial precision, and priceless works of art adorned every wall. And then she saw them, the Blackwoods. They were gathered in a tight, formidable circle near the fireplace, a tableau of power, privilege, and barely concealed animosity. 7 people, all impeccably dressed, all exuding an air of carefully cultivated disdain. When Elara entered, their gazes, sharp and unwelcoming, instantly converged on her. It was like stepping into a spotlight you never wanted, under the scrutiny of a panel of judges who had already decided your fate. Mr. Pendleton, thankfully, was there, a steady anchor in the churning sea of Blackwood gazes. He offered Elara a polite, if somewhat stiff, smile. "Ah, Miss Vance, you've arrived. Please come in." He gestured towards a solitary, antique chair placed slightly apart from the main group. It felt like a deliberate isolation. Elara walked towards it, acutely aware of every single pair of eyes dissecting her. She felt like an alien species, a strange bird that had somehow flown into a gilded cage it didn't belong in. As she settled into the surprisingly uncomfortable chair, Mr. Pendleton began the introductions. First, Eleanor Blackwood, the matriarch. She sat like a queen on a throne, a formidable woman in her late 70s, her silver hair coiled into an elegant bun. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, were a startling shade of glacial blue, and they pierced Elara with an intensity that made her shiver. There was a raw, almost wounded authority about her, a silent power that commanded attention without uttering a single word. She wore a black silk dress that seemed to absorb all light, and a single, breathtaking brooch glittered at her collar. She simply nodded, a tight, curt gesture, her expression unreadable. Next, Julian Blackwood, mid-40s, impeccably tailored with a predatory glint in his dark eyes. He was Alistair's nephew and clearly the presumptive heir. His face was handsome, but etched with an aggressive ambition that was almost palpable. He gave Elara a condescending smirk that made her skin crawl. This is our mystery guest," he drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The long-lost cousin no one's ever heard of." Beside him, Julian's wife, Lydia Blackwood, a woman of striking if somewhat manufactured beauty. Her blonde hair was a perfect cascade, her smile dazzlingly bright, but her eyes, when they met Elara's, held a calculating chill. She was draped in expensive designer clothes, every accessory perfectly chosen. She offered Elara a sickly sweet smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. "Such a pleasure, darling," she cooed, her voice like cut glass. Elara knew, instinctively, that Lydia was a viper cloaked in silk. There was also a younger man, perhaps Julian's son, Alexander, who looked utterly bored, scrolling through his phone, only occasionally glancing up with a dismissive flick of his dark hair. And a stern-faced woman, Alistair's sister, Margaret, who stared at Elara with undisguised suspicion. A few others, equally well-dressed and equally unwelcoming, rounded out the group, their expressions ranging from cold curiosity to outright hostility. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable current of resentment and suspicion directed squarely at Elara. She was an intruder, an unwelcome disruption to their carefully ordered world. Mr. Pendleton cleared his throat, commanding attention. "Now that everyone is present, we can begin the reading of Mr. Alistair Blackwood's last will and testament." He began to read, his voice steady and formal, detailing the vast assets of the Blackwood empire, the companies, the properties, the art, the investments. Julian and Lydia exchanged smug glances, their confidence radiating, assuming the lion's share would fall to them. Eleanor remained impassive, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames in the fireplace. The standard bequests were made, charitable donations, trusts for distant relatives, specific heirlooms for certain family members. Julian and Lydia's names came up frequently, each mention solidifying their expected positions. Elara sat perfectly still, feeling increasingly out of place, convinced that any mention of her would be a minor, dismissive clause, perhaps a small token sum, a gesture of charity from a forgotten relative. Then Mr. Pendleton paused. He adjusted his spectacles, and a subtle shift in his demeanor, a slight tightening of his jaw, caught Elara's attention. The room, already quiet, seemed to hold its breath. And now, he intoned, his voice resonating with a new weight, to the residuary estate. After all specific bequests and debts have been settled, the remainder of Alastair Blackwood's estate, including the majority shareholding in Blackwood Industries, Blackwood Manor itself, and all associated properties and liquid assets, shall be bequeathed in its entirety. Julian leaned forward, a triumphant smirk already forming on his lips. Lydia's hand went to his arm, a silent squeeze of anticipation. Eleanor's gaze, for the first time, flickered away from the fire and settled on Mr. Pendleton's face, a hint of something unreadable in her blue eyes. "To my beloved granddaughter, Elara Vance." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile peace of the room. A collective gasp rippled through the Blackwood family. For a moment, there was utter, stunned silence. Then, the explosion. Julian shot out of his chair as if propelled by an unseen force, his face contorted in an incandescent rage. "Granddaughter. This is preposterous. Alastair had no granddaughter. This is a fraud, a fabrication." His voice boomed, rattling the priceless artifacts on the mantelpiece. Lydia, equally stunned, gasped, her perfect composure finally cracking. "A granddaughter? Who is she? We've never seen her before. Where has she been all this time?" Eleanor Blackwood, however, remained seated. Her glacial blue eyes, now wide with a mixture of shock and something else, something akin to dawning horror, were fixed on Elara. Her knuckles, gripping the arm of her chair, were white. For a brief, terrifying moment, Elara saw a flicker of profound recognition, a flash of pain, in those ancient eyes. Elara herself felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Granddaughter? Alastair Blackwood was her grandfather? She, the quiet bookstore clerk, was the heiress to an empire. It was unfathomable. It was absurd. It was terrifying. Mr. Pendleton, unflustered by the outburst, raised a hand. "Quiet, please. The will is clear." Mr. Blackwood explicitly stated that Elara Vance is his biological granddaughter. He provided documented proof which has been verified by independent sources and has been lodged with the courts. He then looked directly at Elara, a hint of something like sympathy in his professional gaze. "Congratulations, Miss Vance. You are now the primary heir to the Blackwood estate." The room erupted again, a cacophony of angry accusations, disbelieving protests, and frantic whispers. Julian was pacing like a caged beast, his eyes burning holes into Elara. Lydia had her hand over her mouth, her perfect smile replaced by a gaping horror. Elara sat numbly, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was no longer just an outsider, she was a target. The quiet life she had cherished was gone, replaced by a storm of unforeseen magnitude. This isn't just an inheritance, it was an entanglement, a thread pulling her into a tapestry of secrets and lies she knew absolutely nothing about. And as Eleanor Blackwood's eyes, suddenly brimming with unshed tears, met hers across the chaotic room, Elara knew, deep in her gut, that this fortune had come with an incredibly high, and possibly deadly, price. The sheer force of Julian Blackwood's rage was a physical presence in the room. He pointed a trembling finger at Elara, his face scarlet. "This is a conspiracy! A gold digger!" Alastair was old, senile, easily manipulated. "There's no way this nobody, is a Blackwood." His voice was a guttural snarl, devoid of any pretense of civility. Lydia, regaining her composure somewhat, though her eyes still blazed with fury, chimed in. Indeed. Where is the proof, Mr. Pendleton? Where is the evidence of this ludicrous claim? She emphasized ludicrous with a sneer, her perfect features twisting into something ugly. Mr. Pendleton, ever the professional, calmly produced a thick dossier from his briefcase. As I stated, the documentation is comprehensive. DNA evidence, birth certificates, notarized affidavits, all authenticated. Mr. Blackwood spent the last 5 years of his life meticulously tracking down and confirming Miss Vance's lineage. He made preparations for this very eventuality. The words DNA evidence seemed to strike Julian like a physical blow. He staggered back, his face paling. Eleanor Blackwood, meanwhile, had finally pushed herself up from her chair. She looked frail, suddenly her imposing posture giving way to a weary slump. She clutched a hand to her chest, her gaze still fixed on Elara, a complex mix of emotions swirling in their depths. Shock, recognition, and a profound, aching regret. It was a look that haunted Elara, a silent scream of a woman burdened by decades of untold truths. Eleanor, Julian questioned, sensing her sudden fragility, her unusual silence. What is it? You know something, don't you? But Eleanor simply shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. She looked away, as if unable to bear the weight of Elara's presence, or perhaps the mirror it held to her past. The will reading concluded in a haze of legal jargon and escalating Blackwood hostilities. Elara, still reeling, felt like she was floating outside her own body, watching this surreal drama unfold around her. She was a Blackwood, the granddaughter of Alastair Blackwood. It was a truth so earth-shattering, it was impossible to reconcile with the quiet life she had lived for 28 years. Who were her parents, really? Why had she been raised completely unaware of this monumental heritage? The questions swirled in her mind, a dizzying vortex. Mr. Pendleton, sensing the hostile atmosphere, quickly escorted Elara out of the drawing room and into a smaller, more private study. He poured her a glass of water, his usual formality softening into a concerned paternalism. Miss Vance, he began, his voice low and confidential, I understand this is a tremendous shock. Alastair was a complicated man. He held a deep regret for something that happened many years ago, and he spent his later years trying to rectify it. What happened, Mr. Pendleton? Elara finally managed to ask, her voice hoarse. Why was I never told? My parents, who were they? Mr. Pendleton sighed, a weary sound. Your mother was Clarissa Blackwood, Alastair's daughter. She died when you were very young. There was a great tragedy, and a profound scandal. Alastair, in his misguided attempt to protect the family name, and perhaps Clarissa herself from judgment, made some difficult decisions. Decisions that led to you being raised outside the Blackwood family under the assumption your parents were another couple, carefully chosen to provide you with a loving, stable, albeit modest, upbringing. Elara felt a cold knot form in her stomach, her entire life a lie. Her parents, the people she had loved and mourned, were not her biological parents. They had been chosen, placed. It was a staggering betrayal, not of her, but of truth itself. So, my biological mother, Clarissa Blackwood, she's gone? Yes. Many years ago. A car accident, just a few months after your birth. Your original birth certificate, the one with Clarissa listed as your mother, was obscured. Another was created. It was a desperate attempt to erase a painful past and protect what was left of Clarissa's reputation after a particular public scandal. Alastair never truly forgave himself for the decision to separate you from your true heritage, or for how your mother was treated by parts of the family. He wanted amends. What scandal? Elara pressed, feeling an overwhelming sense of urgency. Mr. Pendleton hesitated, then decided to provide a brief, sanitized version. Clarissa was a free spirit. She fell in love with a man the family deemed unsuitable. There was a very public, very ugly engagement to another man, which she broke off for your biological father. The ensuing scandal, particularly with the birth of an illegitimate child, you, Miss Vance, nearly destroyed the family's social standing. Alastair, under immense pressure from his wife, Eleanor, and the family council, felt he had no choice but to ensure you were raised away from the public eye. Your existence was to be a secret. Clarissa, heartbroken and defiant, tried to fight it, but she was young, vulnerable. And then, the accident. Elara, numb as the pieces of this devastating puzzle began to slot to place. Her quiet life, her modest upbringing, all of it was a meticulously crafted illusion, designed to erase a scandal and protect the pristine image of the Blackwood dynasty. Her own mother, Clarissa, a tragic figure caught in the suffocating web of family expectations. So, what happens now? Elara asked, gesturing vaguely towards the rest of the manor where the disgruntled Blackwoods no doubt continued their indignant uproar. You are the rightful owner of Blackwood Manor, Miss Vance, and the CEO of Blackwood Industries. It will take time to transfer everything, but legally it is yours. However, Mr. Pendleton paused, his gaze hardening. I must warn you. Julian Blackwood and his wife, Lydia, will not take this lying down. They stand to lose everything believed was theirs. They will fight you. They will try to discredit you. They may even try to remove you. His voice dropped to a whisper, a chilling implication hanging in the air. Elara felt a cold dread settle in her heart. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a battleground. I would advise you to stay here at the manor for a few days at least. Get a feel for the place, learn the ropes. Alastair ensured a loyal staff remains. But be vigilant, Miss Vance. Very vigilant. The next few days were a strange, unsettling blur. Elara found herself living in a wing of the enormous manor that Alastair had prepared for her, overlooking a vast wild garden. It was luxurious beyond anything she had ever imagined, yet it felt cold, empty, and haunted. Julian and Lydia avoided her, though she could feel their hostile presence, a simmering resentment that permeated the very walls of the manor. When they did cross paths, it was usually in the formal dining room, where mealtimes were agonizingly punctuated only by the clinking of silverware and the oppressive weight of their unspoken fury. Lydia would offer saccharine smiles that never reached her eyes, and Julian would glare at her as if she were a noxious insect. Eleanor Blackwood, the matriarch, was perhaps the most unsettling presence. She was often secluded in her private rooms, but when Elara did see her, there was always that complex, sorrowful gaze. Once, Elara her staring at an old faded portrait of a young woman, her mother, Clarissa, Elara realized with a jolt, a woman with Elara's own curious eyes. Eleanor had quickly averted her gaze, her face crumbling, as if the pain of memory was too great to bear. Elara knew she couldn't just pack up and leave. This was her legacy, her truth. And more than that, she felt an inexplicable pull towards her past, towards the ghost of Clarissa Blackwood. She had to understand. She had to uncover the full story. One evening, unable to sleep in the vast silence of her new rooms, Elara decided to explore. The manor was a labyrinth of corridors, forgotten rooms, and hidden staircases. She felt drawn to the dusty, sprawling library, a sanctuary of knowledge that reminded her of her old life. As she ran her fingers over the spines of ancient books, she noticed a small, unmarked door tucked away behind a rotating bookshelf. Her heart began to pound with a mixture of fear and excitement. This felt like a secret. With a gentle push, The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, winding staircase leading down into darkness. Elara, armed with a flashlight from her bedside table, hesitated for only a moment. Her desire for answers outweighed her trepidation. She descended into the gloom. The staircase led to a small, hidden study, completely unlike the formal rooms upstairs. It was dusty, cobweb-laden, clearly unused for decades. But it wasn't empty. On a small roll-top desk amidst a scattering of old papers and forgotten curios lay a small leather-bound journal. It was old, its pages brittle, its cover faded, but embossed on the front, in elegant, swirling gold script, were the initials, CB. Clarissa Blackwood, her mother. Elara picked it up, her hands trembling. This was it. This was her mother's voice, her story, waiting to be read. She blew a layer of dust off the cover, the scent of old paper, and forgotten secrets filling her nostrils. She flipped it open, and the first entry, dated nearly 30 years ago, began in a delicate, looping script. They say, upon the Blackwood name, they say I destroyed everything. Love. Even my own child. A cold dread washed over Elara, far deeper than any chill in the hidden room. This wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about a hidden history, a terrible injustice, and a truth that someone, perhaps many people, had gone to great lengths to bury. The drama, my friends, was only just beginning, and Elara, the quiet bookstore clerk, was now standing at the very epicenter of a storm that had been brewing for decades. A storm of family secrets, betrayal, and a legacy forged in lies. Elara clutched the journal to her chest, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. Written in her mother's own hand were a direct portal to a past she never knew, a past deliberately concealed. She spent the rest of the night devouring Clarissa's entries, each page a painful revelation, each sentence a new crack in the foundations of the Blackwood dynasty. Clarissa Blackwood was not the frail, tragic figure Mr. Pendleton had briefly painted. She was vibrant, passionate, fiercely independent. A woman ahead of her time, stifled by the rigid expectations of her aristocratic family. The journal chronicled her love affair with a penniless artist, Thomas Vance, Elara's true biological father. Her heart gave a painful lurch at the name. A relationship forbidden by the powerful Eleanor Blackwood and the stern Alastair. The entries painted a vivid picture of the Blackwood family's suffocating control. Clarissa wrote of the relentless pressure to marry a man of suitable standing, the public humiliation when she broke off her engagement to a wealthy industrialist for Thomas. She detailed the venomous whispers, the social ostracism orchestrated by Eleanor, who saw Clarissa's choices as a direct affront to the family's impeccable reputation. But the most heartbreaking entries were those describing Elara's birth. Clarissa, alone and defiant, gave birth to her daughter in secret, away from Blackwood Manor. She poured all her love into Elara, describing her tiny fingers, her curious eyes, her first smile. She yearned to raise Elara with Thomas, free from the judgment and the stifling conventions of the Blackwoods. Then came the darkness. The journal entries grew frantic, filled with despair. Claire recounted how Eleanor and Alastair, furious at the illegitimate child, had effectively kidnapped baby Elara, fabricating documents, orchestrating the adoption. They presented Clarissa with an ultimatum: give up her daughter to a respectable family chosen by them, or be disowned, cast out, and have her name utterly erased from Blackwood history. In her raw grief, Clarissa wrote of her desperate fight, her futile attempts to reclaim her child, but as a young, isolated woman against the formidable power of the Blackwood Empire, she was utterly overwhelmed. The last entry, scrawled in a shaky hand, was a plea, a testament to her enduring love for her lost daughter and a chilling premonition. They are taking her. My Elara, they say I am not fit. But I will fight. I will find you, my love. I will tell you the truth. If I don't, if anything happens to me, remember that your mother loved you more than life itself, and that the truth, like a river, will always find its way to the sea. Guard your heart, my darling, for the Blackwood shadow long and unforgiving. There was no entry about the car accident, about her death. The journal simply ended, abruptly, leaving Elara with a profound sense of loss, a burning injustice, and a terrifying question. What really happened to Clarissa Blackwood? Was it truly an accident? Or was it something far more sinister, a final, desperate act to silence the truth? The revelation transformed Elara's perspective. This wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about rectifying a historical wrong. It was about avenging her mother's pain, honoring her memory, and fighting for the truth that had been denied to them both for decades. Her quiet, peace-loving nature hardened, replaced by a steely resolve. The atmosphere in Blackwood Manor grew colder, more menacing. Julian and Lydia, emboldened by their desperation, began a subtle campaign of harassment. Misplaced documents, sudden technical glitches in the security system, whispers from staff who suddenly looked at Elara with suspicion. They were trying to isolate her, to make her feel unwelcome and paranoid. One morning, Elara found a valuable antique vase, one she knew had been placed precariously close to the edge of a pedestal, shattered on the floor of the grand hallway. Julian immediately accused her, his voice echoing through the manor. Careless, clumsy, you have no respect for tradition, for the history of this house, just like your mother. The last two words were spat with venom, designed to sting. Lydia, playing the part of the sympathetic hostess, chimed in, Darling, perhaps you're simply overwhelmed. This isn't your world, is it? It's far too much for someone inexperienced. Her condescension was a weapon. Elara met Julian's furious gaze, her own eyes unwavering. I am not clumsy, Julian, and I am not easily intimidated. This is my home now, and I will not tolerate accusations or sabotage. She knew they were testing her, pushing her to react. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She also noticed a shift in the behavior of the staff. Some, like Mrs. Gable, the kind, elderly housekeeper who had served the Blackwoods for decades, looked at Elara with a flicker of compassion, a knowing sadness in her eyes. Others, younger staff members, perhaps loyal to Julian, avoided her gaze, their efficiency almost chilling. Elara sought out Mrs. Gable, finding her polishing a silver tea set in the vast kitchen. The scent of cinnamon and polished metal hung in the air. Mrs. Gable, Elara began, her voice low. You've been here a long time, haven't you? The housekeeper, a woman with a kind, crinkled face, paused her work. Since I was a girl, Miss Vance. Since before your mother, before Clarissa. Her voice softened on Clarissa's name. You knew her well, Barnaby? Elara asked, her heart aching. He nodded, his gaze distant. Knew her from the cradle to the day she left us. He paused, then looked directly into Elara's eyes, his expression serious. She didn't leave us willingly, Miss Vance. Not really. Elara's breath hitched. What do you mean, Barnaby? Mrs. Gable hinted at something, too. Barnaby hesitated, glancing around the empty corridor as if walls had ears. Come with me, Miss Vance. There's something I need to show you. Something Alistair asked me to keep safe, for the right time. For you. He led her not through the grand halls, but through a series of servants' passages down a winding stone staircase that seemed to disappear into the very foundations of the manor. They emerged into a vast, damp cellar filled with the scent of earth and ancient wine. Barnaby led her to a remote corner, behind stacks of old crates, where a section of the stone wall looked slightly different, a subtle discoloration. He pushed a specific stone, and with a soft click, a small compartment opened, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a metal box. "Alastair gave this to me years ago," Barnaby explained, his voice hushed. "Said it held the truth. Said if anything ever happened to him, or if the girl ever came back, I was to give it to her. For justice," he said. Elara's hands trembled as she opened the box. Inside, carefully preserved, were several items. One, a bundle of letters, addressed to Clarissa Blackwood, but never sent. From Thomas Vance, her biological father, filled with desperate pleas for her to run away with him and Elara, and later, heartbroken confusion about her sudden disappearance. 2. Tarnished silver locket, engraved with the initials CB and TV. Inside, 2 faded photographs, one of a radiant Clarissa, the other of Thomas, a kind-faced man with a determined gaze, and tucked behind them, a tiny, almost invisible, 3rd photo, a baby, unmistakably Elara, with her mother's curious eyes. 3. A sealed envelope, marked private, Clarissa Blackwood's final confession. This, Elara knew, was the true key. She opened the confession first, her heart pounding. It was Clarissa's last will and testament, written just days before her alleged accident, and notarized by a small-town lawyer who was clearly not part of the Blackwood network. In it, Clarissa detailed the immense pressure, the threats, and the ultimate forced separation from Elara. But more horrifyingly, she described her growing fear for her own life. She stated that she had been gathering evidence against Eleanor Blackwood and her brother, Julian's father, Alastair's older brother, who had since passed away, for their roles in manipulating Alastair, fabricating documents, and effectively kidnapping Elara. Clarissa was about to go public, to expose the entire scandalous truth to the press, and to legally fight for her daughter. "I fear for my life," Clarissa had written. "Eleanor and Richard have warned me. They say if I expose them, if I try to take Elara back, they will ensure I disappear, that it will look like an accident. I am making this confession now in case they succeed. If I die, know that it was not by chance. Seek justice, my darling Elara, for your mother and for yourself." The final lines were a chilling prophecy. Clarissa's accident had happened days after this confession was written. Elara felt a cold wave of horror wash over her. It wasn't just a cover-up, it was murder. Eleanor Blackwood, the cold, powerful matriarch, had not just orchestrated the separation, but potentially her own daughter's death. And Richard, Julian's father, was a co-conspirator. It explained Julian's venomous rage. He was defending his family's honor and perhaps his father's legacy of deceit. She remembered Eleanor's tearful gaze in the drawing room, the profound pain in her eyes. Was it grief for a lost daughter, or the unbearable weight of her own guilt? Armed with this devastating truth, Elara knew she couldn't simply present it to Julian or Lydia. They would deny it, destroy the evidence, and undoubtedly turn their malice towards her. She needed to expose them publicly, legally, and undeniably. Elara discreetly contacted Mr. Pendleton, arranging a secret meeting outside the manor. She explained everything, presented the journal, Clarissa's confession, and the letters from Thomas. Pendleton, usually so composed, looked visibly shaken. "My God," he breathed, carefully examining the documents. Alastair suspected something was amiss with Clarissa's death, but he could never find proof. He feared what his wife and brother were capable of, especially in their prime. He spent his life trying to atone, setting things right for you, but even he couldn't face the full, terrible truth of it all. He thought exposing the truth of your existence was the farthest he could go, hoping it would lead to questions about the rest. "We need to go to the police, Mr. Pendleton," Elara stated, her voice firm. "We can," he said, "but it's an old case. The Blackwoods have immense power, deep connections. We need more than just these documents, as powerful as they are. We need something current, something that links Julian directly to any ongoing attempts to harm you or to silence this truth. We need a live confession or a direct act of sabotage that we can prove. That night, Elara returned to Blackwood Manor, her resolve hardened. She knew she was in danger. Julian and Lydia were growing more desperate, their attempts to undermine her becoming bolder. She started setting up discreet cameras in her private wing, just small, almost invisible devices, hoping to catch something. She kept Clarissa's confession and the journal hidden in a secure place, ready to be presented. The next day, Elara received a seemingly innocuous invitation from Lydia, a private dinner in the main dining room, just the three of them. Elara, Julian, and Lydia. A chance to clear the air, darling. Lydia had purred over the phone, her voice falsely sweet. To come to an understanding, perhaps? We are family, after all. Elara, it was a trap. But it was also an opportunity. She accepted. She dressed carefully for dinner, choosing a simple, elegant black dress, a contrast to Lydia's usual ostentatious displays. As she entered the opulent dining room, Julian and Lydia were already seated, a bottle of expensive wine open on the table. There was an unsettling gleam in Julian's eyes, a nervous excitement in Lydia's forced smile. Elara, darling, Lydia began, pouring a glass of wine for her. We just wanted to apologize for our behavior. This has all been a terrible shock. We truly believe there's been a mistake, a misunderstanding on Alistair's part. He was frail towards the end. Julian leaned forward, his voice a low, dangerous growl. But we're willing to be reasonable. We understand you've been through a lot. You're not cut out for this world, Elara. The responsibilities, the public scrutiny, the sheer cutthroat nature of it all. It would destroy you. But we're willing to offer you a very generous settlement. A substantial sum, enough to live a comfortable life, far away from all this. In exchange, you simply sign over all rights to the Blackwood estate, agree to a non-disclosure, and disappear. For good. Elara met his gaze, unflinching. You want me to walk away from my birthright? From my mother's legacy? From the truth? Lydia laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. Truth? The truth is whatever the Blackwoods want it to be. You're talking about a dusty old journal and some cryptic letters. No one will believe you. Who would you be, a nobody from a bookstore, against the Blackwood name? Julian's face darkened. This isn't a negotiation, Elara. This is a final offer. Accept it, or we will make your life a living hell. We will discredit you, expose your past, paint you as a manipulative gold digger who preyed on an old man's senility. And if that doesn't work, well, this house has many secrets, Elara, some of them quite permanent. His gaze flickered meaningfully to her wineglass. Elara felt a cold wave wash over her. They were openly threatening her, implying poison, just as they had, decades ago, threatened her mother. This was the direct act Pendleton needed. She kept her face impassive, her heart thudding. Is that a threat, Julian? She asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands beneath the table. Consider it a friendly warning, Lydia purred, a sinister gleam in her eyes. Some accidents, darling, are simply unavoidable. Elara took a deep breath. This was it, the confrontation she had been bracing for. She said, her voice rising slightly. My mother, Clarissa, she left a confession. She knew you and your father, Julian and Eleanor, were behind her separation from me. She knew you were threatening her. She even wrote that if anything happened to her, it wouldn't be an accident. She predicted her own murder. Julian and Lydia froze, their faces draining of color. The wineglass in Julian's hand shattered as he gripped it too hard. What are you talking about? Julian roared, rising from his seat, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury. I'm talking about justice, Julian, Elara replied, rising to meet his gaze. And I'm talking about exposing the truth. All of it. Clarissa Blackwood was murdered to cover up a scandal and to protect your family's precious reputation. And I'm here to make sure everyone knows. The storm, my friends, had finally broken. The quiet bookstore clerk, who had merely sought answers, was now standing on the precipice of bringing down an entire dynasty, exposing a legacy of lies and a decades-old murder. The Blackwood secrets, once buried deep, were now rising to the surface, threatening to consume them all. Julian Blackwood lunged forward, his face a mask of primal rage, but Lydia, with a surprising strength born of desperation, grabbed his arm. "Julian, no! Don't be a fool," she hissed, her voice frantic. "She's bluffing. She can't possibly have anything." But even as she spoke, her eyes darted nervously, betraying her terror. Elara stood her ground, her heart pounding, but her gaze unwavering. "I have everything, Julian. My mother's journal, her notarized confession detailing your father's and Eleanor's involvement, letters from my father that prove their relationship, and DNA evidence that proves my identity beyond a shadow of a doubt. Mr. Pendleton has copies. The police are already aware. Your threats, your attempts to sabotage me, your offer of a payoff, it's all on record. My room is wired. And your current threats, Julian and Lydia, have just been recorded." The color drained from Julian's face. Lydia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The sheer audacity of Elara's move, the calculated reveal, had stunned them into silence. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the frantic beat of Elara's own heart. Just then, the grand dining room doors opened. Standing framed in the doorway, her imposing figure seeming to shrink under the weight of the moment, was Eleanor Blackwood. Her glacial blue eyes, now red-rimmed and filled with an unbearable sorrow, swept over the scene. Julian and Lydia, pale and trembling, Elara standing defiant, and the unspoken truths hanging in the air like a death knell. Eleanor slowly walked into the room, her gaze fixed on Elara. "Clarissa," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a fractured echo of a name from the distant past. "My Clarissa, you look so much like her." Elara finally broke eye contact with Julian and Lydia, turning to face her grandmother. "You knew, didn't you, Eleanor? You knew what they did to my mother. You knew about her murder." Eleanor sank into a chair, her shoulders shaking, the powerful matriarch reduced to a frail, weeping old woman. "I suspected," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "Richard, he was always so ruthless. And Alistair, he was afraid of Richard, afraid of the scandal, afraid of losing everything. He was a good man, but weak in the face of his brother's ambition and my own pride." I pushed Clarissa away. "I told her she brought shame upon us. I allowed them to take you, Elara. I helped them create the lie." Her voice broke. "But her death, I prayed it was an accident. I tried to believe it was an accident. But deep down, I always knew it was Richard. He said he would silence her for good, to protect the family, to protect Julian's inheritance." She looked up at Elara, her eyes pleading for a forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. "I lived with that guilt, Elara, every single day. It consumed me. Alistair tried to make amends, to bring you back, to name you the rightful heir, to expose the lie, but he couldn't bear to expose the full horror of his brother. He left it for you to find." Julian and Lydia stood motionless, their faces a mixture of horror and defeat as the matriarch's confession, a confession that implicated Julian's own father, echoed through the room. The carefully constructed world they had inhabited, the one built on lies and murder, was crumbling around them. The next few days were a whirlwind. Mr. Pendleton, armed with Elara's evidence and Eleanor's partial confession, went to the authorities. The Blackwood name, once synonymous with impeccable reputation, was now splashed across every major newspaper. every news channel, entangled in a scandal of epic proportions, family betrayal, forced adoption, and the decades-old murder of Clarissa Blackwood. Julian and Lydia were arrested, charged with obstruction of justice and attempted intimidation, and later, Julian would face further investigation into his father's potential role in Clarissa's death. Eleanor, spared criminal charges due to her age and the passage of time, faced a different kind of justice, public condemnation, the unraveling of her life's work, and the crushing weight of her own conscience. She lived out her remaining days a recluse in a remote wing of the manor, her legacy forever stained, haunted by the ghost of her daughter. The Blackwood Empire, once an unshakable monolith, teetered on the brink. Elara, the quiet bookstore clerk, was now thrust into the impossible position of being its reluctant savior. The world watched, fascinated, as she navigated the treacherous waters of corporate leadership, legal battles, and the relentless glare of the media. But Elara was not alone. Mr. Pendleton became her trusted advisor, helping her untangle the complex web of Blackwood Industries. Barnaby, the loyal gardener, remained a quiet source of support and wisdom, his presence a comforting link to her mother's memory. And Maya, her best friend, provided invaluable emotional support, reminding Elara of the simple joys and the genuine kindness that still existed in the world. Elara made a conscious decision. She would not let the Blackwood name remain synonymous with deceit and darkness. She began to dismantle the corrupt structures, to clean house, to redirect the vast Blackwood wealth towards ethical practices, philanthropy, and genuine social good. She honored her mother's memory by establishing the Clarissa Blackwood Foundation, dedicated to supporting young artists and protecting vulnerable women. She transformed Blackwood Manor, opening parts of its vast gardens and library to the public, turning a symbol of isolation into a place of connection and inspiration. She never forgot her roots, returning often to the dusty bookstore, spending quiet afternoons amidst the familiar scent of old books, a grounding reminder of the life she had once known. She even bought the bookstore, preserving it as a testament to her past. Elara Vance, the rightful heir to the Blackwood legacy, had not simply inherited a fortune. She had inherited a responsibility. She didn't seek power, but power had found her, forcing her to confront the darkest aspects of humanity. She carried the weight of her mother's tragic past, but also the strength of her mother's defiant spirit. The Blackwood name, once shrouded in scandal and fear, slowly began to change. Under Elara's guidance, it started to represent transparency, justice, and redemption. It wasn't an easy path. The shadows of the past were long, and the echoes of betrayal still sometimes whispered through the ancient halls of Blackwood Manor. But Elara, standing tall amidst the ruins of a broken dynasty, had found her voice, reclaimed her heritage, and rewritten her own dramatic story. And that, my friends, is the incredible, harrowing, and ultimately hopeful saga of Elara Vance and the Blackwood family. It's a powerful reminder that truth, however deeply buried, however inconvenient, will always find a way to surface. And sometimes the most ordinary people are destined to become the most extraordinary heroes, especially when confronted with the crushing weight of family secrets and the unbreakable chains of a dark, dramatic legacy.